Welcome to the launch of the Toolkit on Monitoring and Evaluation of Environmental Peace Building. We are really excited to be here. It has taken 2.5 years. It has evolved in ways we did not predict, but we're very excited to be here to share the toolkit with you. We'll start off, I'll give a brief overview of the context and motivation for developing the toolkit. And then Amanda Womer, who is a co-PI on the project, will go structure and content. Shadi Ahmadiyya will review some of the theories of change, which was one of the things that came out of this process that we're very excited about. And then Ella Stack will highlight some of the case studies and videos that we developed in support. And then we'll have commentary by three people who've been engaged in the process throughout. Tegan Blaine from the U.S. Institute of Peace, Yuha Wito from the Global Environment Facility, and Erica Key from Future Earth U.S. Global Hub. Next, please. So I'm just going to provide a bit of context and motivation for the toolkit. Next, please. And I will note that the toolkit came from a broad realization that environmental peace building is a new field, and that we really need more evidence about the effectiveness of these initiatives. If you can elaborate the slide, fill it out, please. And so the environmental peace building includes a range of activities at the intersection of environment, conflict, and peace. They're not always referred to or labeled as environmental peace building, but where it has that intersection, it presents particular challenges. Often there are unintended consequences, or historically there have been negative unintended consequences, and trying to improve the monitoring and evaluation in part is fostering learning, reducing the unintended consequences, showing impact, and thereby mobilizing funding for environmental peace building. And from our perspective, the long-term viability of environmental peace building as a field and funding for work in this field depends on developing more effective approaches to monitoring, evaluation, and learning. Next, please. And monitoring and evaluation for environmental peacebuilding interventions, both projects and programs, faces a distinct set of challenges. Next, please. A lot of it, as I mentioned, comes from the fact that environmental peacebuilding is a young and emerging field, rapidly evolving. There's a lot of innovation, a lot of experimentation, but we don't always know what works in what circumstances. The theories of change are underdeveloped. There are a lot of ideas about how the world should work and the programming around that. But the question is, what actually works under what circumstances? And so there are serious questions about being able to make the theories of change more robust. We also see different indicators and tools for environmental programming and for peacebuilding programming, and trying to integrate those can be challenging. And even when you have tracking of environmental dimensions and peacebuilding dimensions, there's often this causation question about how do you know that improvements in the environmental status led to or contributed to improvements in peace or peace building, and it wasn't vice versa, or that they were entirely independent. And there often are difficulties in evaluating the outcomes and impacts at different scales, at different timelines. In practice, most practitioners and evaluators usually have either an environmental or peace-building expertise, and so there often are blind spots when it comes to monitoring and evaluation of these sorts of interventions. And I will also note that monitoring in this space can be particularly useful in the development and operationalization of early warning and adaptive management. And I think one of the big things that we like to emphasize here is just how important the learning side is. That often monitoring and evaluation is an exercise in accountability to make sure that the money was spent the way it was said to be spent, make sure that the project was doing what it sought to achieve. But the other side of monitoring and evaluation that is really important here is learning. And this is with the innovations that we're seeing, we need to be able to be free to experiment, to try things, and to learn from them, and not to be afraid that some of them will not work in certain circumstances. But when it doesn't work, we should learn from those experiences. Next, please. There are also challenges that are shared with other programming. Some of these are long time horizons, the difficulty of attributing impacts to the particular intervention, the cost. And one of the things that you will see throughout the toolkit are efforts for us to highlight both what is often considered best practice and what is considered kind of necessary, but not necessarily best practice, but it's right sizing. You have limited resources, you have limited time. What do you do under those circumstances? And so we've tried to highlight throughout ways that monitoring and evaluation can be scaled up or scaled down depending on the context for the user. Next, please. A lot of benefits from monitoring and evaluation, showing impact and accountability. One of the things that I think is really important is that a lot of these contexts that are very fluid, they're very dynamic, and the adaptive management of the programming in that space is really important. And for those who aren't familiar with adaptive management, recognizes that at the design stage, we only know so much about the situation, and that our knowledge continues to evolve. So we make provisional decisions, and then we go ahead and implement. But we make a focus on monitoring, then periodically evaluating to see, are we on track? Do we need to adjust course in some way? And so it's much more dynamic, and I think that is important to note here. This also encourages innovation because we're able to try something, to test something, and then to see, is it working, or how do we adjust course? Next, please. Overall, the toolkit seeks to answer what are the best M&E practices for environmental peace building interventions. And this isn't necessarily the gold standard. It really does depend on what your context is. And so we have tried to allow for a wide range of users, whether it's a small NGO or a big intergovernmental organization. Best is not always the most elaborate, the most resource intensive. It really depends on what is feasible under the circumstances. And in doing so, also, what are the key unanswered questions related to monitoring and evaluation of environmental peace building? And a lot of those, I think, we found to be in the space of trying to identify what the theories of change are, how people are using those, what the accompanying indicators are. Next, please. So we had a detailed, elaborate process, in part because if you actually look at the literature on monitoring and evaluation of environmental peace building, is very thin. There's a lot of literature on monitoring and evaluation of environmental program, a lot of literature on peace building, on development. But the question is, how do those integrate into the context of environmental peace building? And one of the things that we did to help focus our research was a pre-project survey that sought to identify what practitioners and researchers in the space felt were the most important needs. And that then guided our literature review. We did a series of in-depth interviews with experts. Some of those we later recorded into case studies, and Ella will talk about that. We had a number of focus groups and workshops, events. One of the things that I'm most proud of was the innovation that we had in developing what we call peer learning groups, where we would take an issue that somebody was working on, because when we were interviewing people, they would often say, "Oh, I'm struggling with this," and so we would, that's great. We would love to kind of crowdsource responses to that. And so we held a series of these meetings virtually with the Chatham House Rule, where the person would set up the issue, and then we would brainstorm what are different approaches, and that helped us to develop the approaches within the toolkit. And I will say that aside from the core project team, we had very active and constructive engagement with an advisory group and with the Environmental Peacebuilding Association's Monitoring and Evaluation Interest Group. Next, please. Here is the advisory committee, and we have a number of people, I think, online, including some of the speakers from the advisory committee. We're very lucky to have had such a diverse and distinguished and constructive group that helped us both in thinking through this and in doing a lot of the research and writing. Next, please. And I think at this point, I will turn it over to Amanda Womer. Amanda?
Thanks, Carl. And thank you everyone for being here today. As Carl mentioned, this has been a labor of love over many years, collaborating together with a lot of people on this call. And so it's really amazing to see the toolkit out in the world, including a physical copy that Ella has. It's pretty neat to see. So I'm going to go ahead and go over the contents of the toolkit. If you've attended other webinars or presentations we've done, some of this will sound familiar, but it'll provide an overview of what's in the toolkit and some specific really neat pieces that we're very proud of. If you want to go to the next slide, Ella. So first, there's actually two components for the toolkit. We have the primer, and then we have the toolkit itself. And the primer is really nice because it includes an overview of environmental peace building, and then it includes an overview of monitoring and evaluation. And then it discusses some of the unique characteristics, opportunities, and challenges of doing monitoring and evaluation for environmental peace building, a lot of which Carl already discussed. So it's a great place to start if you feel that maybe you need some more information on what exactly do we mean when we say environmental peace building, or you want to do a deeper dive into some of the key aspects of monitoring and evaluation. It's a great place to start before digging into the toolkit. And then the toolkit itself is divided into a number of chapters, which I'll go through now. If you want to go to the next slide, Ella. So we have to organize the toolkit around an intervention cycle. So we cover design, monitoring, evaluation, and learning as part of that intervention cycle and happening throughout the implementation of an environmental peace building intervention. And we have these cool icons throughout the toolkit to kind of guide you on where you're at in the process, but those are how the chapters are split up. If you'd like to go to the next slide, Ella. So some overarching elements that are found throughout the toolkit include those icons that I mentioned. So we have the icons for the key chapters and the phases of monitoring or design, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. But then we also have some icons to guide you in terms of gender or data that are spread throughout the toolkit as markers of where we discuss those things, so that it's easy to find if it's of interest to you. Another great part of the toolkit is there are case studies or examples spread throughout the toolkit, including some in-depth case studies that we've done on particular environmental peace building interventions. These help add context and depth and more detail into what we're talking about, because we want to make sure that the toolkit is really able to be used and is accessible. And so the case studies add to that, showing the ways that some of the elements that we've included can be used in the real world. We also have some key considerations that flow throughout all of the chapters of the toolkit that we found were really important no matter what we were talking about. And those are conflict sensitivity, participation and inclusion, and gender. And so we found that even in environmental peace building, even if you have peace building objectives, it's important to make sure that what you do with your M&E is conflict sensitive. We can't assume that it is just because it's a peace building intervention, but how do we really make sure these processes that we're doing to monitor our work, to assess our work, are conflict sensitive? We also are really concerned with and promoting participation and inclusion. In all of that background work that we did that Carl discussed, we found that participation and inclusion of different groups in different ways, and ways that are conflict sensitive, is really important to forwarding the objectives of environmental peace building and to doing really good M&E work. So throughout the toolkit, you'll find places where we talk about how to be more participatory, what to consider when you're trying to be more inclusive. And then, of course, gender is a really important part of environmental peace building work. And so throughout the toolkit, we have spaces where we talk about, if we're thinking about gender, what does this look like, or what could it look like, and what questions you should ask yourself. And then each chapter also includes at least one worksheet, which is kind of what it sounds like. And it's a template where you can go through certain questions, and in some cases, actually certain places where you could write out responses to those questions to help you think through, what should I do if I'm designing an intervention in the M&E approach for that? What should I do if I'm planning for my monitoring and I want to develop a really participatory, inclusive plan? So those worksheets are throughout the toolkit, and we hope they're really helpful for you. You want to go to the next slide? Thanks. So the first chapter, beyond the introduction, hence why it says number 2, is design. And this chapter is divided into preparing for design and then conducting the design. And then we have 3 worksheets on theories of change, indicators, and integrating gender. And so this chapter is very focused on, what do you do when you're planning an intervention? Where do you start? Because if you think of M&E and you think about what monitoring and evaluation mean, evaluation is assessment, and you actually have to start with assessing the context in which you're working. So the preparing for design section includes context analysis, where we talk about needs assessments, stakeholder analysis, conflict analysis, and environmental and social impact assessment. These tools are also really useful to go over because we have found that they can be used later as tools for monitoring and evaluation. So they're a great place to start. We also discuss those key considerations in this chapter, including conflict sensitivity, participation, inclusion, and gender. We also talk about systems and complexity and how to address that when you're designing an intervention and the M&E approach for that intervention. We talk about preparing to look at contribution versus attribution. And we also talk about the challenges and some approaches for operating in insecure contexts. Then we move on to design, where we have a really comprehensive section on theories of change, including an outline of these kind of buckets of theories of change that we found in environmental peace building work. We talk about how to develop indicators that are relevant for the work, especially thinking about how we can combine the environmental side and the peace building side, and what kind of indicators are important for that, including qualitative and perception-based indicators. And then there's guidance for developing a comprehensive MEL plan. And that can be worked through in some of those worksheets. In the next chapter, which is monitoring, we talk about various approaches to monitoring that are really important for environmental peace building work. And I think one of the things that really struck me in going through this development process was how important monitoring is for environmental peace building work. Whereas maybe traditionally we've done some monitoring, but really put a lot of emphasis on evaluations, midterm evaluations, final evaluations. Monitoring in environmental peace building is so important given the dynamic context Carl mentioned for early warning purposes. So we talk about some really key approaches there, including ways to be participatory, to use monitoring for early warning and adaptive management, how to be conflict sensitive, and how to address the gendered aspects. We also talk in this chapter about data-related challenges and how to address those. We highlight good practices, including really interesting ways of collecting data in insecure contexts, ideas for increasing participation and inclusion, and how doing monitoring in a certain way can actually support your intervention objectives. We also talk about monitoring for unintended effects, and there's a worksheet that walks you through key questions on developing a monitoring plan, and a great annex that includes some important secondary data sources that might be useful to you. The next chapter is evaluation, where we cover the challenges of doing evaluations of environmental peace building and have some step-by-step approaches to designing evaluations and conducting them. We also have a section on programmatic evaluations, as we found in doing this work that environmental peace building is actually often an amalgamation of multiple interventions, and it takes a long time and is based on systems change. And so how can we do programmatic evaluation better? The chapter covers different topics like the different kinds of accountability and inclusion in that, specific evaluative challenges and ways to address them, including linking environmental and peace building dimensions, using perception-based information, understanding long-term effects, focusing on contribution, and then of course, ensuring gender sensitivity. There's also a great table that goes over specific evaluation methods and approaches that we found that are useful in this space that account for complexity, right sizing, and revisiting conflict analyses, like I mentioned, and ensuring ways that you can explore those unintended consequences further. This chapter, like the monitoring chapter, sees evaluation as a really important component to doing environmental peace building work. So it's not M&E is over here, the intervention's over here, but how can the way that you do evaluations really support your intervention objectives? And then of course, there's a great worksheet at the end of the chapter. And the final chapter is on learning, which I find is often kind of forgotten. You do the evaluation, great, check the box, let's move on. But as Carl discussed, and as the other chapters have emphasized, we're doing this to really inform the way environmental peace building works, to feed back into the process, which makes the chapter super essential for talking about how to convert that evidence that's gathered in monitoring and evaluation and convert it into learning and action. So this chapter covers guiding questions on how to incorporate learning into your M&E plan or your MEL plan and the broader intervention cycle, different kinds of learning activities that you can undertake, which hopefully will spark some ideas, and learning approaches that are more conducive to action. And then it has a worksheet with questions to think through when you're designing and implementing your learning plan, related to those challenges that are discussed, including developing learning questions, roles and responsibilities for who will work on the learning activities, the different outputs or products that might come from those activities, and some ideas for sharing learnings more broadly, because as Carl mentioned, there's not a lot of evidence in this space. So we want to think through how can we share what we're learning and improve the field more generally. So with that, I think I'm handing it over to Shadi.
Thank you, Amanda. So I'm going to be talking about the theories of change, which are also known as intervention logics or results change, and capture the causal linkages or pathways, often from activities to outputs to outcomes, and finally impact across the short, medium, and the long term. A theory of change can play a key role in how we frame, measure, and monitor results, as well as how we strategically orient our interventions to support environmental peace building. What we've done in the toolkit is curate illustrative theories of change for environmental peace building across 5 key priorities: basic safety and security, provision of basic services, sustainable economies and livelihoods, social cohesion, cooperation, and trust building, and finally, good governance and inclusive political processes. In terms of, as Amanda mentioned earlier, the cross-cutting principles she mentioned still apply here to the theories of change under each theme. They should be conflict sensitive, gender sensitive, participatory, and inclusive. And while this list isn't comprehensive, it's illustrative of common theories of change. The idea behind this category of 5 different priorities was that you have actors across the spectrum, from development, where I work at the World Bank, to conservation actors, to humanitarian actors, etc. We may all have different mandates based on the institutions that we're coming from in approaching this work, but our objectives often converge within these 5 categories at the environment and peace building nexus. Next, please. For example, right now I'm currently in Tashkent at a regional dialogue for transboundary conservation in Central Asia. And here you can see the theories of change in the toolkit listed with underneath these 5 priority areas. Specifically, this list has been curated to include those that are specifically related to peace parks. And so I was able to present this menu to make the intervention logics very clear to a broad audience who typically works in the environment space and isn't really familiar with the peace building space, to make those linkages very, very clear. By presenting the theory of change options, they can see where they can enhance the peace building dimensions of their environmental interventions. Next, please. This table here shows each theory of change is broken down between sample activities, the sample theory of change with an if, the then, and the because, in terms of short, medium, and long term, and also gives key considerations and assumptions and the risks listed. Next, please. We've also connected some of the theories of change and to indicators that we've identified. Thanks to a hackathon that several members of the Environmental Peacebuilding Association participated in. And the indicators breaks down the theory of change connection across the short term with sample indicators for the if activities, to the then and the because, so that we can measure at each step of the link. And this, as Carl mentioned before, the theories of change for environmental peace building are very underdeveloped. And so our hope is that by designing this type of breakdown, by pursuing this type of breakdown and having corresponding indicators, we can build the evidence base, think through how our interventions are working and how to monitor to make sure that they're working, and also take heed of the unexpected consequences to make sure that we're not doing harm and that we're staying accountable to those that we seek to support in our interventions. Thank you, and I'd like to pass it on over to you, Ella, for the case studies.
Great, thanks, Shadi. The case studies and M&E Insight videos came out of the recognition that people often learn best from specific examples. To start, the case studies expand on lessons touched on more broadly in the toolkit. There are also several more in-depth case studies, of which the condensed version is in the toolkit and the expanded version is included under downloads for the chapter. Given that the case studies are so place-based, we also decided to feature the case studies in an interactive map at the top of the page. One case study I wanted to highlight is assessing the potential for environmental peace building over shared waters through EcoPeace Middle East 25 plus years of experience. This case study describes the ongoing programmatic evaluation undertaken by a research team based at Oregon State University and American University to look at EcoPeace Middle East programming. And the case study describes assumptions that their analysis is challenging. I highly encourage you to check the case studies out. I also wanted to touch on the M&E Insight series. The M&E Insight series features video interviews with a range of practitioners in the field, highlighting different aspects of conducting M&E for interventions at the intersection of environment, conflict, and peace. Featured topics of these videos include exploring theories of change, which is the one featured on the page with Hector Morales Munoz, and fostering transboundary cooperation over shared waters and fragile states, among others. The videos are available on the Insights dropdown by hovering on the word Toolkit at the top of the Toolkit page. And they are also posted to YouTube, as well as included in the interactive map. Before passing it over to Carl, I also wanted to thank all the interviewees in the M&E Insight series, as well as the people who helped develop or confirm the content for the case studies.
I think now we have three commentators. Ella, the order was...
We'll start with Tegan and then go to Yuha and then Erica.
Okay, so Tegan, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Carl and Ella. Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to have so many people join this seminar. This toolkit was supported through a grant from the U.S. Institute of Peace, just as we were beginning to build a new program on climate, environment, and peace building at the U.S. Institute of Peace. Overall, I am so pleased to be here today and to see how this toolkit has developed. For me, it's just an important, a critical tool in beginning to see the environmental peace building sector being taken seriously as a sector and as a valid approach to peace building. In my mind, this toolkit is absolutely critical for several different reasons. First off, it provides an enormous assistance in providing organization and structure in terms of how we think about environmental peace building by laying out a topology of theories of change and ways to look at how we are evaluating success and better understanding what approaches work in what sector. Those kinds of things are critical to being able to decide on different approaches and to be able to communicate our results. I also think this toolkit is incredibly powerful because it's practically a programming guide. It consolidates so much thinking on environmental peace building and just the provision of references, the provision of different approaches to different types of analysis, a whole set of case studies. It's everything all in one basket, which is easy to find and presented in a way that's relatively easy to digest and to understand where to go for additional help. But the most critical contribution of this entire work is that it lays out a future to professionalizing the field of environmental programming. It allows us to see a future in which we are clearly testing our hypotheses about what approaches may be effective in what different settings, in a way that allows us to begin thinking about what approaches we should continue using, how we actually work most effectively in this field. And that is absolutely critical to professionalizing this field and to allow it to be taken more seriously within the peace building community. You know, I often reflect on the fact that the environmental peacebuilding community is primarily built of people who come from more of an environmental background instead of a peacebuilding background. And when I talk to people both at the Institute of Peace and in the wider community, I often find two categories of people. One category of people who come from a peacebuilding community and who recognize the importance of environment issues, but don't know how to go about integrating an environmental peacebuilding approach into their work. And then a second set of people who really feel that environment is just a lesser priority and compared to much more pressing issues. You know, I think that this toolkit and the future that it lays out for us assists in helping engage both those types of individuals. For the people who think that environmental peacebuilding could be a critical component of their peacebuilding work, but who don't know how to begin approaching it, this is the toolkit they need to understand that. And for people who might be more on the skeptical side, who don't understand how some of the opportunities provided by the environmental peacebuilding community can really lead to helping them build things like trust between individuals in a community, cooperation around particular issues that can be built upon to achieve other goals, or even community cohesion. This is the pathway that can help develop the data and the information we need to make that case. So thank you very much for all of your hard work on this, Carl, Amanda, and the wider team. I am so impressed with the overall work and really glad that the U.S. Institute of Peace could at least provide the opening for you all to deliver such an important piece of work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tegan. I really appreciated your all your comments, but especially the comment about laying out the future for professionalizing the field, because I really think that hits at the core of what this does. So thank you for your comments and thank you for your support. Juha, you're up next.
Thanks very much, Carl and everybody. I'll start by taking up what Tegan was saying about the types of people who come to this field, and I'm certainly one of those who comes from the environmental side rather than the peace building side. And it's interesting, you know, I work for the Global Environment Facility, and it's not very long time ago when the GEF didn't pay any attention to issues such as conflict and fragility and vulnerability and things like that, because we were programming for the global environment. So why would we care about what happens in the society around it? But we have realized that that doesn't make any sense, and more than half of our projects actually operate in what can be called fragile, conflict affected or vulnerable situations. So that's very important, and we have realized that the performance of GF funded activities and projects and programs depends very much on the context. So the context is very important here. So, and the whole, I think also that the whole development scene has changed over the past few years and decades, in the sense that there has been a polarization, if you wish, between countries that are on a solid development track, if any, whereas the role of countries and situations where conflict is taking place is getting more important. So I think that from that point of view, this toolkit is extremely important, and it can guide practitioners and policymakers in operating in this nexus between conflict development and environment and natural resources management. I don't want to repeat what Carl was saying in the beginning already about the specifics of these kind of situations, but just to reiterate the fact that they are complex and they are fluid, and you have issues which pertain to issues such as the timelines of interventions versus the processes that we want to influence, and what are the benchmarks and so on. Maybe from the monitoring and evaluation point of view, one of the important things is this on the one hand institutional capacity for doing these kinds of things, and especially when we are talking about fast-moving and fluid situations. So we have to find practical and pragmatic approaches to building in M&E systems into these. You know, I'm struck also by the cross-cutting themes in this toolkit, which I find are all very important, but just to emphasize the importance of participation and inclusion, which I think is extremely important everywhere, obviously, but especially in these types of conflict situations where the roots of the conflict are often in the fact that that there has been less participation and inclusion, or that there are unequal access to resources and so on. So it's particularly important for us to monitor and evaluate the distribution of benefits, because there's always also the risk that an intervention that we set out there may actually, you know, lead into a better situation for, you know, a certain period of time, but doesn't necessarily address the root causes, and will therefore not be sustainable. Well, so this toolkit I find is extremely useful, and it really helps us to think through integrating these aspects of peace building, environmental status, and development in general. Carl mentioned earlier that there is the whole issue of causality, and I think maybe it was Amanda who mentioned that there's this issue of attribution versus contribution, and these are complicated issues, and therefore I think and they cut both ways, obviously, from natural resources to conflict, and the role of natural resources in resolving conflict also. So I think that here one important innovation or aspect of this toolkit is this emphasis on theories of change, which tries to unpack some of these issues. There is guidance both on monitoring and evaluation and learning, which has been emphasized, and which is also very, very important here. And so this is like Carl has said earlier, that this is an area where there's a lot of innovation, a lot of urgency, a lot of things happening in fast pace. People don't necessarily know what works and what doesn't. So I hope that this toolkit and its approach that it promotes really helps us to think these things through, and also the important aspect of unintended consequences. And I'm very, very pleased to see that is there, because when we create theories of change, we often think about the internal logic of the intervention, and we don't necessarily see. We think about assumptions and we think about risks, but we don't necessarily see the whole big picture. And if a consequence is unanticipated, it means it doesn't feature in the theory of change. So it has to be sort of like we have to have our eyes open and inactively searching for these things. My final point is then that, and it has been mentioned earlier, and that one of the challenges in general we find is that evaluators tend to be pretty much anchored in social science traditions. And we need to be sensitized to and advised on how to incorporate the natural systems into our evaluations. And in the spirit of this coupled human natural systems perspective, where humans and our activities take place in a environment which has its own dynamics. And I think that this toolkit helps us to move to that direction. So in general, I think this extremely innovative and useful product. It's something that is needed, I can't think of any other product in the same category that would address systematically all of these issues. And the fact that it looks into the context, it moves into, it's flexible, but builds on theories of change and emphasizes the coupled natural and human systems. So thanks very much for working on this, and it's been a pleasure to be part of the advisory group and see it from the side as you have been working very hard on putting it together. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Juha, and thank you for your guidance along the way. It's been incredibly helpful. I'd like to turn to Erica Key now. Before I do so, just quickly want to note that we have a couple of questions. We'll have time for some Q&A after this, at the end of Erica's presentation. So we have a couple of good substantive questions in the Q&A. I would encourage people to ask or share away. Would love to have your feedback and your questions. Erica, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Carl. I'm very excited about this development, a bit selfishly, coming from a transdisciplinary funding background. The recognition that over the past 2 decades, research and adaptation science has become increasingly more intertwined. It's been a product of both a bottom-up interest in more societally relevant and interconnected work, as well as a top-down recognition that a lot of times the monies being applied are tax-based and therefore should show a return on investment to the people, to the citizenry. So I look at this toolkit as being a resource not just for funded activities in environmental peace building that need to generate their own internal monitoring and evaluation scheme in order to best approach very complex problems and to be able to pivot and adapt along that path, but also on the funding side of the house to better set up monitoring, evaluation, and learning schemes for programs that are funding in this space. So there are actually 2 levels that this can benefit. And recognizing that, as was said before, environmental peace building is emerging. It is work that has been funded for years, but under different different vocabulary, if we want to say that. So from the natural science side, just employing transdisciplinary techniques and approaches that really work across different knowledge systems towards an output that can influence or transform policy and practice. How do we know when that is successful? How do we know the long-term impact and contribution of that? And there have been a lot of experiments in this space on the funding side to be able to capture this, but we have been a bit remiss in developing the community's ability to generate indicators, theories of change, and other aspects of that impact that we're asking for. So it's really timely to have this toolkit available to the community and available to funders to have a shared understanding of how that can be developed, measured, and how that learning can feed back into the program, so we don't keep revisiting the same approaches, that we don't reinvent the wheel every time. And building this community and sharing these practices, building sort of a coalition of the willing around environmental peace building is so critical. Being able to communicate with each other about the added value of your activity. We've seen that evolution of added value from the development of papers and the development of students in this space to now much richer fields of added value. And by that, I mean the value proposition of those that are supporting the work, that are looking for that conflict resolution, that development of shared understanding around a natural resource. They sort of next level societally relevant indicators. So I'm really happy to see many years of work culminating in a very rich resource that recognizes that a lot of this work is done at a very local level, and that there are pressures from funding to scale or to look at how the work can be applied in other scenarios, and having that flexibility and understanding of what is broadly applicable and what works within very defined parameters. So I will be using this toolkit as we are developing with the Belmont Forum a funding call on environmental peace building to help with the funding side of the house to understand what is environmental peace building, their role in it, and the expectations that they can have from projects, as well as the training through a toolkit such as this they can give to the projects to meet these very lofty requirements for funding, as well as encouraging funded projects to utilize this toolkit in the development of their internal project level monitoring, evaluation, and learning to guide their work and to give them that scaffolding that they need to be able to communicate to stakeholders they might be working with, but to one another and back to their funders, the successes of their work. So it is a multifactorial use case in this one toolkit. And I'm really hoping that we can utilize this structure to build that learning community, to build those outputs that can share and further strengthen the environmental peace building community, and also bring in those others that have been working in this field, but not calling it environmental peace building, so that there is less of a fear on the natural science side of the word peace, and in the peace building community, a feeling of more welcome, working across these different knowledge types, and for the stakeholders, a recognition of what they're receiving from this collaborative effort. So, Carl, I learned so much through this process just working with the team, and I feel like I've grown in my understanding, and I hope that we can have a successful funding call that further supports the community and the use of this toolkit in that cohort. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. And I have to say, I learned a lot through this. I had some questions and ideas that persisted throughout, and then I had a whole set of others that I discovered along the way. It was very exciting. I would invite the speakers to turn on their cameras now, and we can shift to Q&A. We have 4 questions on the table, and happy to let people choose questions that they would like to answer. I don't know, Shadi, there are kind of 2 on that I think relate to something you said, but I think a number of other people could also chime in. One around how do we define peace dividends, and the other around what new indicators that are needed. And I don't know if you or Amanda would like to weigh in on either of those.
Sure. I'm happy to weigh in. In terms of defining peace dividends, Carl, I feel like you're also quite an expert on this in terms of thinking through how can we leverage the provision of basic services? How can we leverage the provision of environmental interventions in a way that brings benefits to communities and does so in a quickly enough to make that connection very, very clear. And that's also part of, it's also why it's so hard to measure what those what that cause and effect is. And I think it's recognizing in terms of indicators we're learning by doing. There are situational indicators to keep in mind to know what our state of play is. There are local context indicators to let us know how people define peace, but then there are also project-specific indicators to let us know what those environment and conflict interactions are. And I think just as Yuha said earlier, it's by looking at those theories of change that we can hopefully, we're not exactly where we need to be in terms of indicators, but I think we're on the path to help uncover those relationships. Amanda or Carl, if you would like to add to that.
I think what you said, Shadi, was spot on. And I know there's always the question of advocating for donors who have their own predefined indicators. But what Shadi just said too about the theories of change, I think if we can link those indicators to the theories of change, to the change pathways, the rationale for them becomes quite obvious, right? And I think any kind of advocating for change within donors, or even just being able to communicate the information, as Erica and I think others have talked about, sharing and talking the same way. Once we have those clear, those change pathways or theories of change, these other pieces may, I don't want to say fall into place, but it'll be easier to put them into place.
I also wanted to follow up on the peace dividends just briefly. Shadi, I think you explained it well. I think there are a couple things that I would add. One is that these are often done sometimes by militaries, sometimes by other humanitarian actors. They are short-term activities. Immediately following a ceasefire or a peace agreement, they're not meant to address the underlying causes of the conflict necessarily. They are trying to show the value of peace and just, okay, we've got peace. Let's get water to people. Let's get electricity to people. Let's rebuild the some of the irrigation systems that might have been damaged, but just to show that there's value in peace. And so that it buys time for the longer processes. So it's a very distinct set of activities, and it doesn't necessarily seek to build, kind of resolve the underlying drivers of conflict or insecurity, but more to build confidence in the peace process. And then we had a couple of questions that were really big picture questions here. And but maybe before we go there, if anybody else would like to weigh in on the indicators in particular, I think that really is in many ways the kind of the further elaboration of theories of change and testing of them and the accompanying indicators. I do think that is a lot of the next steps that we are facing. Erica?
I just want to point out that through platforms like the Belmont Forum and other collaborative funding spaces, we've seen sort of a relaxation in the rigidity of the former indicator added value and, sort of the fear to fail. Funders are becoming much more sanguine about the fact that you can learn from failure and that this is an iterative process. And so you may set out a first set of indicators and you have, an approach, and it may not work, and that's okay. And we want to learn from that failure and share that. So you'll see new questions popping up about what challenges, what obstacles you have faced in trying to complete the work, and that's just as valuable as something that is extremely successful. So I'm very curious to see how this toolkit might influence even global level activities like the Group on Earth Observations, which recently came out with a new strategy where their primary goal is the reduction of loss of life through the use and application of remote sensing. That's a really lofty goal. How are they going to show that? And I think this toolkit could be really helpful in setting up that structure.
Thank you. Juha, please.
Very briefly, and actually what Erica was saying is very much related, but so we have to think about these indicators and the in different levels. So you have the ultimate goal of saving lives and saving the planet and so on, but that's a long-term process, and attribution becomes harder and so on. But there are many very important intermediate outcomes that we can measure and that we should track. And from the GEF work, for example, so we've discovered that, for example, things like setting in place legislation or regulations and enforcement and so on, those are kind of extremely important sine qua non for achieving the longer term outcomes. So we have to we shouldn't shy away from these intermediate indicators either.
I was also wondering about the concept of indicators, because to some extent, one of the things that we found as we talked with people was that often just talking with people, you wound up getting a lot of information that helped you understand what was happening, why things worked or why they didn't, or why they went sideways. And so it, kind of things that might not be as amenable to measurement, but are very important to understanding. Indicators sometimes can be, if you focus only on indicators, sometimes you wind up constraining your ability to understand. I'm wondering if anybody would like to comment on that.
No, just absolutely. Yes, indicators are
Okay.
reductionist, and they are just indicators, and the world is much more complex. So absolutely, but they don't all have to be either on-off kind of indicators. You have more, qualitative approaches too.
Yeah, and I think there was some sense when maybe we started doing this work that really what people wanted was this menu of indicators that they could just apply to environmental peace building and it would solve all the problems. And unfortunately, that's just not possible, given that we need to be contextually grounded, and there are lots of changes. It's very dynamic, and as someone put a question in systems based, to me, the biggest thing that came out of this was the importance of qualitative indicators and really understanding the perceptions of people better who are involved, and really understanding why things are happening and why people think they're happening, because we found some examples where, changes that may have come about because of one thing, if they're perceived to have come about because of another reason, or perceived to be inequitable, or that can really have an impact. And so not relying on just those quantitative indicators that your donor requires you to include, but having a lot more of the qualitative indicators and a lot more of a focus on learning, and looking for unintended impacts, and kind of capturing this evidence, not necessarily through indicators, but capturing it nonetheless in a systematic way.
If I could add something to what Amanda said there, I also was looking at Daniel Kangogo's comment about whether there's a need for systems-based theories of change. And I honestly think of developing theories of change as being very coming out of systems, and theories of change, the development process of theories of change actually being a way to get all of that complexity as we understand it out at the table, but then to be able to begin simplifying to some of the key drivers and key areas, because to some degree we need to be able to structure our thinking around complexity. Complex systems that are unlimited, if we're thinking in unlimited ways about complexity, then there's never a clear path forward. And beginning to think about an understanding of that complexity in order to begin right sizing, as a phrase that was used in the report, or beginning to pull out pieces and highlighting those pieces because we're coming to the understanding that they are some of the more critical pieces, is one of the most powerful tools of working through a process to develop theories of change. And to me, that fits in entirely to what Amanda was talking about in terms of the need to look at both quantitative and qualitative indicators in order to deal with some of that complexity. But at the same time, because we're human and because we need some degree of organization around our thinking, we have to, at some point, begin pulling out some of the most critical sorry, I'm stumbling over myself. Some of the most critical strands in how we are understanding that complexity, and focus a little bit just in order to be able to move forward.
Well said, Tegan. I'm wondering if we might shift gears a little to the comment from Sergio, who was saying that historically there's been a strong focus of environmental peace building on situations that are either, in conflict or post-conflict, but that we are seeing backsliding in support for democracy, and looking at the broader context there. I think that one of the very interesting things that I've found in environmental peace building over the years is that there are quite a few people that work on social conflicts that don't have armies or rebels. It's more protests around hard rock mining, or environmental justice issues, Standing Rock, and that there are a lot of people who use the environmental peace building frameworks and theories of change in those contexts, which kind of extend in that direction, then also just more generally in the good governance. I'm wondering if people have thoughts about how does the monitoring and evaluation of efforts in these areas, whether it's, are the theories of change different, or are the methodologies different? Thoughts? Ella, could you elevate Charles Kelly to a speaker maybe? Looks like he
Yes.
has some thoughts that he would like to make on this. There's your, I'm really glad for the question. I'm sorry we're not giving you a good, strong set of answers.
You should be able to talk now.
Okay, Kelly, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks a lot, everybody. Carl, you can hear me, my microphone works.
Yes.
Yeah, just what I wanted to say was actually an observation more than the answer to the question. I was just in a meeting with the International Association of Impact Assessment on the participatory sector. And they have a lot of the same questions that we come up with in terms of big kinetic conflicts as opposed to small conflicts like building a dam and having people unhappy about being relocated and things like that. So I would actually suggest that at some point we may want to have a conversation with some of the people at IAIA about these kinds of conflict levels, issues and levels of conflict and natures of conflict, because I think there's a lot of commonality between them, and particularly in terms of environmental impact assessment, it's all about environment. And the peace building or not peace having kind of situation is very similar, although the scales can be quite different between different events. So that's just an observation, and later on we can discuss how we can organize maybe a joint meeting to discuss some of these points. Thanks.
Carl, we can't hear you.
After all these years, you would think I'd figure out the mute button. Amanda, would you like to follow up?
I do think that I'm not sure exactly how to answer Sergio's question either, in terms of how, but I do think that there is often a missed opportunity to think about environmental peace building happening at different levels and not assuming that it has to be overt violent conflict that it's addressing. But instead, how can we build social cohesion and trust in institutions and that sort of thing at very localized community levels all the way up in places where maybe conflicts are not so overt, and or in fact perhaps there's the threat of conflict, but think about conflict in a more holistic way. I started doing this work as conflict sensitive conservation, and a lot of people on this call have heard me say when I tried to talk to conservation organizations 12 years ago about this, the response that I often got was, well, we don't deal with conflict, we're doing conservation. But I think that was more about thinking about conflicts as, I don't work in places of war, so I don't deal with conflict. When in fact, when we dug into it, there are tons of conflicts happening in any conservation context because it's about resources and who's using them and how. So I do think there's an opportunity for that, for more discussion as well.
Yes, Erica.
Yes, I mean, my experience just when peace was first brought in front of a lot of the global research funders, the word peace was anathema. It was not something that they worked on and they were afraid of it. But in reality, they were funding environmental peace building. It was just not in these hot conflict scenarios. And rather, they think of it as a management issue. And so it tends to fall under more of your operational funding because they see that tension as something that just needs to be managed. Now we're looking into the research of that management and how to build that fabric for longer term sustainability. So I think this construct of, social action, we just go by so many different other names: climate action, sustainability, resilience. And so recognizing how all of this folds into the environmental peace building umbrella, which I think welcomes all of it, and how we can show that we have, reduced conflict, achieved a peaceful resolution, or even delivered sustainability? How do you show that you've actually made something sustainable? So I think we're all in this same bucket.
I wonder if we might shift to Seamus Land's question about speaking to the cross-cultural aspects of this work. How do we ensure that this kind of toolkit process is complementary to other worldviews or theories of change? And I think this builds nicely on the intervention that Kelly just had. If it's participatory, but how do you account for very different understandings of the world or even different facts?
I think, Carl, one thing, of course, this toolkit was written by people, the people that you see on the screen, or some of it was. But I think in it being more about ideas and questions and things to consider versus that menu of indicators or a specific, you must do this, it leaves a lot of room for asking questions, which I think is the first step to doing that, right? So instead of us saying, well, to have a participatory and inclusive and conflict sensitive design process, you have to do these steps. These are the exact things you must do. We instead are often posing questions about what to think through, and assuming you're asking those questions to a variety of people, that's at least, one step further in making sure that the approaches are contextually relevant and grounded, versus if we had provided something more prescriptive. And I think that was our intention was, we cannot, of course, be all things to all people, but can we really get the key questions in there that practitioners can take with them to be the right thing to the right people in the places where they are.
Thank you, Amanda. I wanted to draw people's attention also to Tom Gillespie's comment that environmentalists have looked at conflict with caution as they associate that with hard security responses. They don't want to be associated with those. And there's a lot of concern about securitizing environmental issues. And the traction gained by the term environmental peace building is helpful. I don't know if anybody needs to follow up on that, but I did think that was an interesting insight. And yes, Erica?
I would counter that despite best efforts to distance, environmentalism from hard conflict, as we grow more transdisciplinary, we have to recognize the risk that we put people into when they are challenging power structures. So I think we've been a bit naive and sort of had blinders on for a long time, but increasingly this becomes part of the review process of the amount of personal risk to teams that are working in seemingly benign spaces, which can quickly turn to a more violent end. So I'm glad that we are waking up to this and that we are engaging more in this cross-pollination between natural sciences and social sciences to ground the work.
There's a very nice comment from a question from Heloise Heyer, who's asking if we might be able to dive in a little bit more on the question of unintended effects, both negative and positive, and how to better gear M&E systems to capture those and what type of value this could have, notably for adaptive management. Juha, I don't know if you want to start with that. This is a favorite topic of yours. Juha, you're muted. We're still not hearing you.
Okay, I put my microphone up on my head. So, yeah, I think that what we would try to do is basically when you start looking at an evaluation or start looking at the theory of change, So I think it's important that we look at the broader landscape in which an intervention takes place and identify the key actors. And I realize that it's an open-ended thing. So you can't just go as far as anything would take you logically, and that's Tegan's point, that you have to a certain degree simplify the landscape in that we are looking at. But at the same time, it's important to place an intervention in a broader landscape and understand that it interacts with what else is there, and the else can be all these, the natural environment, the social structures, the conflict itself, the other programs, policies, and so on, which often may actually work to the detriment of what we want to do. So it's I'd say that, you know, it's a kind of a mapping exercise in the beginning. Also, is to see that what are the key elements that you have to be aware of, and where you may encounter things that lead to something unanticipated. So it's a bit theoretical, but you know, in practice, just to look at the landscape more broadly than just the intervention itself.
And if something happens that you were not expecting, maybe the first time that is allowed, but you shouldn't be surprised the second time. And in fact, you should be planning for it, or designing for it, whether it's to capture the positive as a co-benefit, or managing the risks of a negative unintended consequence.
If I may just briefly mention that in the UN evaluation group, where I'm coordinating an effort on environmental impact, so we looked at a bunch of more than 50 evaluations by UN agencies, and the things that were unanticipated consequences could well have been often anticipated if there had been expertise in the teams that design projects and implement projects to look into the wider landscape. And often it's the environmental thing that people didn't look into, and then, wow, voila, we are having a problem. And so what we are trying to do in that context is to develop a sort of like a common list of you know, often happening environmental consequences of certain types of projects, so that you can be on the lookout for them.
Any other comments on the unintended consequences? Yes, Amanda.
Trying to make sure I'm unmuted. I do think that, you know, there are lots of tools you can use for capturing unintended consequences, but like a lot of M&E, I find that the most important thing is to make a plan. Whatever that plan is, you know, to make a plan that you have throughout the intervention at points to stop and, you know, either really intentionally document things that you've seen or talk to people, and that doesn't have to be incredibly formal, or, you know, create a log, like an outcome log or journal where you can write that information down. Whatever it is, there isn't one thing that works best, but I do think if you don't create the plan, I mean, sort of similar to what Juha was just saying about starting with the expertise, if you don't start with that, you're probably going to get halfway through and be like, oh wait, what did we do? There wasn't a plan for this in place, and now I kind of have just done what I needed to do without capturing that information. And the same with a lot of these other things we've been talking about. So starting from the beginning and asking what would work for us in this context, to make sure that we're regularly stopping and asking the questions and documenting the answers and our reactions to them.
Excellent. Thank you, Amanda. Yuha, did you see the comment from Kara Tarif? Great to receive the list that you mentioned.
It's work in progress, and we are planning on submitting this to the UN evaluation group annual meeting in February. So after that, it will be available.
Great, thank you. There are a number of comments that are more substantive on environmental peace building than dealing with the monitoring and evaluation, but I think that they tie in to the theories of change. So Marlene Stranford had a few questions about incentivizing or capitalizing, harvesting the potential of mineral resources, driving more aggression and tension toward natural resources. I think that's definitely the case. I think that the M&E side of that is, to the extent that institutions are trying to recognize that generates tensions, what can they do to reduce that, say, as we transition to a carbon neutral economy? And what are being successful, or are they generating their own impacts? I think that a lot of the questions that similarly the question of that John Porterfield had about how conflict avoidance might be influenced by recognizing that Homo sapiens receive double the value received from the economy from nature, and trying to incorporate that into decision making. The question is, I think these are great stimulating questions. The question is, from an M&E perspective, how do you show that? Not that it has double the value, but so how do you get that to influence decision making, and are those efforts successful? I don't know. We have just a couple minutes left. Does anybody have any comments, whether it's on the questions or more broadly? We have about 90 seconds. Erica, would you like to go first?
Sure. I'm just excited by the variety of questions in the Q&A, and I do think look through the toolkit. I think it'll spur ideas of how to address many of these, and I'm just hoping for such a positive response when we get this funding call live. So thank you very much for letting me be part of this.
Thank you. Tegan.
I think this toolkit, amazing as it is still a first attempt. And as you say in the document, it needs to continue evolving. And so I would invite anybody who works with this toolkit and who has thoughts about how it can be improved to go ahead and submit those comments to Carl and his team. This is an amazing starting place, but we're dealing with an incredibly complex field that is still very new and very growing. And I'm sure there will be ways to continue to improve this toolkit over many, many years.
Thank you, Tegan. Juha.
Well, I'm just struck by the fact that we had so many people on this call and such a lively discussion in the chat. So that's amazing. And it really proves that there's a lot of demand for this this kind of a work.
Excellent. Thank you, Juha. Ella.
I just want to hold up the toolkit and really encourage everyone to check it out. There's lots of great stuff in there, so I hope you'll dive in.
Excellent. Thank you. And Shadi?
Thank you, everyone. Again, building off what Juha said, and also what Erica and Tegan mentioned before, it's a work in progress, and we just have there's so many different stakeholders here in this room today. We've had 116 participants. I look forward to the steps ahead to mainstream this and learn from one another and collaborate with one another to really build a robust community of practice.
Excellent. Thank you, Shadi. Before I turn it over to Amanda for the last word, I do want to note that the toolkit, currently in English and momentarily in French and Spanish, It will be available at M&E/environmentalpeacebuilding.org. And I think Ella put that in the chat, and maybe you can do it one more time before we head out. Amanda, the final word is yours.
Thanks, Carl. Thank you to everyone on our panel today and to everyone that joined. This has been a long process, but really the point is it's not worth much if it's not used. And as Tegan said, we want this to be used. We want critiques, we want comments, we want feedback. We want to talk to you about how it can be used. And some of those conversations are already happening, but the important part of it is that it gets used and that it improves the practice. And so we really look to all of you here today to help move that forward. And I'm very excited for the future.
Thank you all. Take care.